Good morning. I'm harleysch from the LaRouche organization with your daily update for October 6th, 2021. I want to cover a couple stories today which I think will provide you with some insights into the predicament we now face as a civilization, including here in the United States, and also what steps can be taken to reverse this. This is not an automatic, predetermined collapse. But an effort by certain groups, certain individuals, to transform civilization through massive population reduction and an increasing concentration of resources and wealth. Now, if you look at some of these stories that are now coming out, it becomes clear that this is the result of an intention of a group of financier oligarchs. And I want to give you some of these insights that we have put together that can help direct a counteroffensive. Let's start with an article that appeared in the London Economist, which is one of the leading mouthpieces for this financier oligarchy. It was in their October 4th edition, titled "The Age of Fossil Fuel Abundance is Over. Dwindling investment in oil, gas, and coal means high prices are here to stay." I'm sure most of you are aware that you're paying more for utilities, more for gasoline at the pump, and there are warnings that this will continue to go up. There'll be more inflation coming. Now, what they predict in this article is that energy scarcity will get, quote, even worse because those investments are harder in an era of decarbonization, unquote. However, they say this is good news, because there will be an inflationary upheaval. In other words, you won't be able to afford energy prices, but it will, quote, accelerate the shift to greener sources of energy. Consumers must brace for more shortages. The age of abundance is dead, unquote. Now, they don't acknowledge that these are artificial shortages. We haven't run out of coal in the world. We haven't run out of oil. In fact, those resources are still much cheaper than the electricity that's produced by less efficient forms such as solar and wind that are costly because they require subsidies, and they also are not efficient. So there's no reason that we have to rely on those kinds of so-called sustainable energies, except that the policy decision has been made based on fake science, which claims that the traditional methods of electricity production, coal, nuclear, natural gas, and so on, are the cause of global warming. That's a fraud. So they've created a scientific fraud to justify a shift to less efficient technologies, which will ensure that there will be shortages and ultimately deaths resulting from these shortages. Now, this was all presented by Klaus Schwab of the Davos Group in a book called Stakeholder Capitalism. I just want to read you a couple of quotes. In his book, he attacks not just Western consumers, but he's attacking China's efforts to use coal and nuclear to uplift people around the world out of poverty the way they have uplifted their own population out of poverty. Here's what he writes, quote, "The same force that helps people escape from poverty and lead a decent life is the one that is destroying the livability of our planet." So you return to this fake science argument. He goes on to say the emissions that lead to climate change are not just the result of a selfish generation of industrialists or Western baby boomers. They are the consequence of the desire to create a better future for oneself, unquote. In other words, trying to improve the conditions of humanity is what's causing the crisis that means we have to make a worse future for people. It's an inverse kind of fake logic, which can only be accepted if you brainwash a population to accept the line from Fridays for Future and so on. It's not shocking at all that Greta Thunberg, one of the spokesmen, the promoted spokesman for this policy, said in Italy the other day that it's the Industrial Revolution that's causing global warming, and that's what must be reversed. The Industrial Revolution that lifted billions of people out of poverty, and was the basis for increasing longevity and better lives. All of this has to go based on the demands of fake science. Now, let's just take a quick look at how China is responding to the energy inflation that's caused by these policies. Caused not by shortages of coal, but by the deliberate inflation caused by speculation. Coal futures are up 75% in China in September, and as a result, there have been electricity blackouts in several regions. Well, China's Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission issued a statement a couple days ago demanding that there be financing provided for energy producers, that is, from the state banks and other financial institutions, and they issued a warning that commodity speculation is illegal. They said that the companies involved in speculation, hoarding, and price gouging will be investigated and punished. In other words, the government of China is committed to provide credit for production to make sure that there will be electricity produced that is adequate for the nation's needs and affordable, and will punish predatory speculators. Sounds like a pretty good idea, doesn't it? Why don't we try that in the West? Now, you can't say there was no advanced warning that these kinds of Malthusian policies, policies of population reduction, using artificial shortages and scarcity and so on, that there was no advance warning of this. In fact, Lyndon LaRouche devoted his life to warning about this and to offering alternative suggestions for economic development, for advances in electrical production, and so on. Beginning prior to 1971, when there was a shift to a post-industrial society, LaRouche warned that the globalists and their neoliberal economic policies were modeled on Hitler's economic minister Hjalmar Schacht's policies, and that these include austerity, committed to reduce the population of useless eaters. That was one of the central focal points of his many presidential campaigns. In fact, he went after Henry Kissinger's 1975 National Security Study Memo 200, which called for reduction of population in mostly third world countries. He also went after the Trilateral Commission and Paul Volcker's Project 1980s, which were committed to the idea of controlled disintegration of the advanced sector economies. Now, as a result of this, LaRouche's warnings, there was a Get LaRouche task force convened that began in part in reaction to Ronald Reagan bringing LaRouche in to negotiate with the Russians over the Strategic Defense Initiative, but also over LaRouche's warnings that these neo-Malthusian killers were going to use energy policy and economic policy to transform the country. And today is an important date in the history of this Get LaRouche task force. October 6th, 1986, 35 years ago, there was a raid against Lyndon LaRouche's home and against our offices in Leesburg, Virginia. His home was surrounded by more than 400 armed personnel, including FBI, including various local and state enforcement agencies, tanks, and there were people who were bragging about the fact that they had a bullet in their gun that was intended for Lyndon LaRouche. This was stopped by an urgent appeal to the Justice Department and to Ronald Reagan himself that eventually forced them to move back from the home and allow LaRouche to turn himself in. Years later, LaRouche wrote an article on this called "The Night They Came to Kill Me." And he said this was not ordered by the Justice Department, but by higher-ups, by what he described as those Venetian-style international financier oligarchical interests who were committed to the post-industrial shift of the United States and the Western economy into a form of wild-eyed monetarism and speculation. So these were the people who were out to kill LaRouche and destroy the movement. Now, he fought back for years. He never surrendered to them, and we have not yet surrendered to them, and we're not going to. We're leading a global fight. You can't defeat them in one country because they're a global force. But you can use the institutions of many nations to combat this kind of craziness. Today, they're in big trouble. There's disagreement from many countries with the Green New Deal. The COP26 conference coming up on November 1st in Glasgow, Scotland, is looking like it could turn into a fiasco. The Indians aren't interested in it. The Australian Prime Minister said he may not come. The Chinese and the Russians, while saying, well, okay, maybe we have to do something to clean the environment, are going full speed ahead with coal and nuclear development. So and African countries are saying, don't take away our policy for development. So we have an opportunity to defeat them. We can defeat them globally because these policies are global policies. Klaus Schwab is not simply an American. He's he's a figure of the Davos billionaires. They function on an international arena. So do we. We have the capability to win the fight if we know what it's about, who's behind it, who the enemy is, and what the solutions are. And I'd urge you to keep going to the LaRouche publications, larouchepub.com, and the LaRouche organization website to get an update, because we're following it day by day, reporting what no one else is reporting. And we'll continue to do so until we win this fight. So thanks for joining me today. And by the way, for those of you who think I'm a wild-eyed optimist and that we're somehow naive, you're naive because you're living a death wish if you don't join us to fight these forces. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again tomorrow.